For purposes of a farewell address, the chair recognizes Representative Gary Glenn.
Thank you, my dear Mr. Speaker. All of us were told when we got here that our time would be short. And it's true, my 6 years in the House seemed to go by in only 4. I do want to thank the voters of Bay and Midland counties for the honor and privilege of representing them. I'd like to thank my parents for their example, my wife and children for their love and support, my campaign manager and my volunteer chair, Adam DeAngeli and Carolyn Wagner, my first chief of staff, former Representative and Senator Mike Gashka, who now works for Representative Howell. He was a godsend on whose reputation I leaned for credibility early on. I look back now and laugh at how desperately he thought it was his job that first 6 months on the job to separate me from 2 other Tea Party Republicans who were elected the same time that I was. And I was so appreciative of his work on the energy issue as well. My current staff, Mark Jordan and Jordan Kaiser, have done a great job. And I can't help but mention somebody from communications staff who was assigned to write news releases for me, Bob Dobsky, who was diagnosed with cancer 6 months after I did, but died only a few months later. I'd like to think I've had some impact here, but perhaps the greatest impact I had was that hour I spent on the phone in my car, sitting in my garage, talking to Lee Chatfield sometime in 2013, doing my best to persuade him not to wait until the seat was open, but how important it would be for him to run now in 2014. And I'm so glad that I succeeded future Speaker Chatfield. I think it's kind of funny to look back on my first days here when, being an old-fashioned kind of guy, we'd have meetings, and when they break up, there were times when Chairman Cox was the only female still among us. And I didn't feel right after dark, her walking back to her car by herself. And so I dutifully, chivalrously walked with her to her car, only to find out later that she had been a U.S. Customs special agent and on the security detail for President Bush, and that she was packing, and that while I thought I was protecting her, she was in fact protecting me. I feel I may have had the privilege of serving with 4 of our younger House members, I'm not going to name them, but who I think have the skill set that I could see them being president someday. 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat, assuming he's willing to shave. The other day, one of our colleagues in his farewell speech pointed to the 2016 energy bill as a model of how we should pass legislation. And I couldn't help but laugh. As vice chair of the House Energy Committee my first term, I was told when we arrived here in January of 2015 that by June 1st we would put on the governor's desk a bill supported by the governor, the chairman of the House Energy Committee, and the Senate Energy Committee, a bill that would eliminate the scant 10% of Michigan's electricity market that can be bought and sold from somebody other than our 2 major utilities. We had amendments presented to us in committee in which, before they were even handed out, 3 or 4-page amendments, the roll call was being called. So we adopted them first, then discussed them. Thankfully, the votes weren't there to pass that particular version on the floor, and what came out of the Senate when coming over here the last week of lame duck was gutted in the middle of the night and rewritten by a young man in his pajamas in a hotel room in San Francisco. I used to say that as a joke, but then I checked with him and he said, yes, I was in my pajamas. We were here from 10 in the morning till 6 a.m. the next day. The governor came to persuade us to take action on the legislation at about 5 a.m. I remember Doc Canfield was snoring very loudly. We were allowed to go get a few hours of sleep I believe we came back at 1 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, I woke up and found a new 230-page bill on my phone on which we were expected to vote some few hours later. But thankfully, the kid in his pajamas was my kid in his pajamas. And as a result, we were able to save the electricity choice program, saving our public schools at least $15 million a year. But I can't think of a worse way to pass legislation than to vote on something that's 230 pages long, the most complex, difficult issue we faced, and nobody had even read it except Representative Geis claimed to have done so because she was a former public school teacher. And I salute her if that was the case. I couldn't have played the role that I did without Cammie Pendle and Brendan Ringlever and Bill Levinsey and Laura Chappelle and Dwayne Pickett, and I certainly thank them for their support along the way. So I had 1 year of normal political fisticuffs and hand-to-hand combat, followed by 3 years of struggling simply to survive, with the media and 109 of my closest friends witnessing it every day. 1 week after being named MERS Freshman Legislator of the Year, which was a big deal back home in Midland, took up 2/3 of the front page, the next week being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Men, if you haven't heard of a PSA test, if it's 4 or above, you're in trouble. So when they found mine, it was 342. It had climbed up out of my prostate and destroyed the L5 vertebrae. If you looked at an x-ray, you had all those shiny white vertebrae in your spinal column and a black hole where the L5 vertebrae used to be. Had a broken back, didn't even know it. I had former Representative Colton actually give me a chiropractic adjustment when I didn't know I had that broken back. You'd think that being told you had cancer would be the most shocking thing you've been told in the hospital. That's what they told me on Friday night. It's not a good sign when they take you from the MRI room where they thought they were going to find a herniated disc and escort you to the emergency room. But the more shocking thing was the next morning when the urologist and 2 little grim-faced minions came into my bedroom there, hospital room, and Annette was standing there, and she said the words, "In the past," went in one ear and out the other. Because the urologist said, "Mr. Glenn, in the past, the first thing we've done in response to a prostate cancer diagnosis is perform an immediate emergency castration. And so we wanted to come talk to you today." How'd I get to be 57 years of age and not know that? And I said, "Whoa, what?" And she said, "Oh, don't worry. We have drugs that have the same effect." So if you've seen those TV commercials about a guy on the low T, yeah, I've been on the no T plan for the last 3 years. And if nothing else, guys, my experience hopefully will encourage you to get your prostate checked on a regular basis. It's one of my favorite stories, and I know it is the speaker's. A few weeks later, he told me that after his doctor had told him and Janelle that they would never be able to have children, that now Janelle was miraculously pregnant. And I said simply, I said, "Tom, I hope I'm still around in 7 months to hold your baby." And he said, "Gary, I'm confident the Lord is going to keep you around, and I'm so confident, I promise you that when the baby comes, we're going to take a picture on the house floor. It's going to be our miracle photo, the miracle baby, and you still being around to hold it." And we took it right up there. That I stand here at all today is a testimony to the healing power of Jesus' name. Because in the book that I read, it says in the red letters, "I will come and heal him." Ronnie Peterson, can I get an amen? They had me wear this world championship wrestling belt since I was cut in half at the waist in terms of my skeleton. They told me that they would have to insert a titanium cage in my spinal column to replace the destroyed vertebrae, and Annette was looking forward to telling people that if you thought Gary had a backbone before, now it's going to be titanium reinforced. But after about 4 months, we watched those x-rays, and the L5 vertebrae grew back out of nothing. which all the doctors said is not supposed to happen. So praise the Lord. He said, take the belt off, work your way back into normal activity. I want to thank all of my colleagues for your prayers on both sides of the aisle. I want to thank the Republican caucus for not just praying for me, but laying hands on me and praying. And I want to thank Sergeant Dixon, maybe for something different than everybody else has thanked him for. But every day as I'd come here, and some days when I felt terrible, I'd say, how you doing? And he'd say, blessed. And it would remind me that I'm blessed just to still being here. But I want to thank in particular Dr. Bison and Dr. Canfield for only being a few feet away for those 2 or 3 years I needed you, and Pastor Noble for being there for spiritual healing when necessary. I was in remission for 2 years, and then it came back this spring. One day this past June, before we broke, I was in such pain that I told Speaker Pro Tem Chatfield and Jim and others that I'd taken too many painkillers because I felt loopy and probably shouldn't be in the chair. But I didn't tell Dan, and all the other guys were out of the room, and so he said, hey, let's get going, and can you do it? Sure, I'll go do my duty. And I got up there, and Lee came in the back door and about half trotted up to relieve me. I think he was afraid I was going to raise taxes or something. Speaking of Representative Chatfield, I often spoke about how much I liked to play basketball, so some lobbyists started a weekly game shortly after I had completed chemo just to humor me. I was in terrible shape, 50, 60 pounds heavier than I'd been a few months before from the chemo and the hormone treatment and steroids and all. And one of the things chemo does to you, it makes your fast twitch muscle reflexes ineffective. And so I saw what I thought was an opening to the basket, and Lee stepped in front of me, and I planted hard with my left foot like I'd done 10,000 times before. And the only reason you don't fall down every time you do that is because the right leg then comes up and takes the next step. My brain told the right leg to come take that next step. My right leg did not move. So I went straight into the wood. This last couple of years has been nothing if not humbling. But I could shoot some threes. And in all the weeks we played, I only hit one layup. I drove the lane, lowered my shoulder, and sent the person guarding me sprawling across the floor. She was a cute blonde young lady who came up to about here on me. I only learned later that she worked for Democratic staff. But I often say I still have all the same moves in my head. Despite being 70 pounds heavier from all of the various treatments, I feel like a shadow of my former self, a kinder, gentler Gary Glenn that my adversaries from past political conflicts would never recognize. So you'll understand why I get a kick out of the fact that one of the biggest, baddest lobbies in Lansing thought that little old me, even crippled up with cancer, was such a threat to their power that it was worth spending over $1 million in this year's primary to ensure my early retirement. No complaints, that's life in the Big Ten. I did have some fun with them. When the cancer came back this summer, my PSA went back up to 170 and 3 new tumors appeared on my spinal column, requiring 10 days straight of radiation. I told one of their lobbyists that if they'd just been patient and wait about 6 months, they might be able to save the $1 million. I'm not sure if she saw the humor in that. I told another one of their lobbyists after the primary, when I'd gone back into remission, that they might have as much to do with my getting better as the University of Michigan Cancer Center, because while I would never voluntarily walk away from the fight, since they'd taken me out, now I have a chance to actually rest up. And with a major side effect of oral chemo being severe fatigue that makes even the most pedestrian tasks, tie my shoes, take a shower, pack to go home, exhausting. Physically, colleagues, I can't wait for the opportunity to do just that in another week, just rest. I have no regrets. Not once have I thought if I'd only been quieter about the principles in which I firmly believe, things might have turned out differently. It was a privilege to be one of 110 people out of 10 million, given the opportunity to take a stand and influence policy decisions that affect our state. and I trust simply that God has a plan for my life, and I try to follow it best I can. Some words of encouragement for whatever they're worth. In a week in which I was feeling most heavily pressured to vote for something I'd promised in 9,000 conversations door to door I would not vote for, I went to see the Tom Hanks movie Bridge of Spies, which reminded me of the brutality of the Soviet Union. And in one scene in the movie, a college kid was stripped naked and beaten on a concrete slab, and it snapped me out of it. It made me realize no matter how I might vote on any issue, nobody here is going to strip me naked and beat me. So by comparison to what others have suffered for their beliefs throughout time, colleagues, there's no pressure here. And you can't walk around afraid of your own shadow because some big money group doesn't agree with your beliefs or votes either. The people who sent you here trust you to act with courage. Have the courage to vote your conscience and the principles you profess to believe. Be faithful to the duty with which your constituents entrusted you. Over 4 years, even during 5 months of chemotherapy and a broken back and inconceivable fatigue, I've never missed a committee meeting or a vote on the House floor. But that's only possible because of my wife, Annette. And to put it in context, she had told me before the diagnosis that because our last remaining child was in his last year at home with us, she wasn't going to spend much time in Lansing with me that year, 2016. She wanted to spend it at home with him. But once I was diagnosed, she drove me to Lansing each week when I was literally unconscious, sat with me on the floor and in every committee, made sure I took all the drugs, and over the course of our 35 years of marriage, never more so than the last 3 years, proved her love and faithfulness to our wedding vows in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. Those of you who were here to witness that, I know she earns your affection and respect. A few weeks from now, I assure you, you'll have the privilege of serving with the better Representative Glenn. And please, if you would, colleagues, keep her in your prayers. Her World War II veteran father died just last week, ironically, from the exact same cancer that I have. And we'll bury him with full military honors this weekend. In the depths of the chemotherapy, I gained appreciation for senior citizens or very sick people who have no hope of ever getting better. I had hope that I would feel better after the chemotherapy. But when I weighed whether I'd want to go on living if I knew it would never get better, I always decided that I would, because no matter how bad it felt, I reasoned I'd still be around to play with my grandchildren. When it came to what kept me going, never giving up, just take one more breath, just make it one more day till tomorrow, I instinctively thought of my grandchildren, not how many more bills I might pass. But that doesn't mean I'm any less passionate about the sense of calling and duty to which I've committed my professional life for the last 4 decades. I was raised by a World War II Marine who taught me to love my country, stand up for what I believe in, and fight for those that I love. From my youngest memories, I've had a passion for the ideals of individual liberty and character and faith on which this nation was founded. I took 2 oaths as a younger man, one as an Eagle Scout. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country. And 20 years later, during the Gulf War buildup, I put on a uniform and swore to uphold and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Because I believe that our country and what it stands for is something exceptional in the history of the world. And as John F. Kennedy said, we bear the burden and the glory of defending our country and its founding principles of individual liberty, free enterprise, and faith, as JFK also said, that our rights come not from government but from the hand of God, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. In our case, a limited government bound by the chains of the Constitution. As my public service to those principles may be drawing to a close, I hope my wife and my children are proud to be seen with me around town. I hope my father is proud. My mother assures me that she is and that he was. But I think that's a question each of us should ask ourselves. If you remember the closing scene of Saving Private Ryan, in which the old Private Ryan begs his wife to tell him he's lived a good life, he's been a good man, worthy of the sacrifice that had been made on his behalf, we should ask ourselves each day, are we living in such a way to be worthy of the terrible price paid over the history of this country by those who came before us? And finally, I hope someday to hear, though not too soon, the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." I hope you're all standing there with me to hear those words for yourself. Until then, farewell, Merry Christmas. God bless and keep us strong for the fight. Thank you, colleagues, so very much.